So I'm Monica Davis. For those who don't know, New College Life Track is a returning adults program. So many of these people are part-time students. They have work experience. Many of them have had some education and for whatever reason stopped going to school or had very low GPAs. You know, many I've heard will talk about the maturity level the first time they went through education versus coming back. So this is a different type of population than the traditional undergrad. And I teach different courses related to human resource topics. And so in the spring, I kind of incorporated some stuff into my course, and it was Introduction to Separation Practices. And within our small group, when we met, we would talk about some of the challenges that were there. And so my learning outcomes for these students were, when you're talking HR stuff, I'm firing someone, that's hard. I don't care how many times you've done it, it never gets easier. And how to prepare the students for those type of conversations in the real world. And one thing I kind of talked about with our small group is it's hard sometimes when you're trying to do a mock situation to keep people serious. You know, it's easy for them to want to laugh through it versus really taking it serious. So how do I structure these scenarios and these environments to let it go there? And how can they start to prepare themselves for what could be coming? You know, when you go into a termination, what are some of those things you could expect to happen, and how can you be prepared for that on the front end? And so one thing that I took from our group, and I put it in my spring class, but for this next spring is really when this will take full effect, is making the situations a little more organic. I would kind of set out the scenario. And one of the folks in our class talked about, let the scenario grow itself a little more, let it go where it goes. That's a little crazy at times, of course, but it was very interesting to see what students would do when you unleash them. And when I originally started teaching this, it was, we would talk the concept, okay, what are the 5 things that are going to happen in a termination that must happen, to let's do the scenario and then let's talk about the situation. So they had to start learning that. And one thing I realized in working with this generational people and the learners is emotional control. Because I had one student who, sweetest person, she owns her own business, and when she was terminating an employee, she was going, oh, I understand, that's so wonderful news, oh yes. Shaking her head yes the whole time, affirming everything the person she's terminating is saying. And it's like those are little clues, little things the person being terminated gets. And so at the end of that scenario, instead of me stepping in and saying, okay, here's what we think, it's hard, but you stepping back and saying, okay, class give feedback. And one of the classmates was like, you know, what message are you sending to this person who's being terminated when you're affirming everything they're saying and you're shaking your head yes the whole time you're terminating them? So we really started talking about all those things that happen that we don't even know we're doing. So a lot of what this course is about is preparation. You know, we all are going to have those difficult conversations and all, and structuring the course to let the students experience that. I do kind of preempt some things just because there are uncomfortable situations, and I've realized how I present the class on the front end structuring, because sometimes in the termination practices class and in the hiring, some of those questions that come into race and gender and equity. And so one time I had a male student who, when he was being terminated, said, well, I identify as a female, that's why you're terminating me, right? And it sounds very far-fetched. But in the world we live in today, these are things you can experience in a difficult conversation. So trying to set it up to say, here are some things you can think about ahead of time, and making them think through that. In their reflections, they write about, you know, how to handle, like I pose a question, how would you kind of deal with this situation or that? And one thing I changed in a class I did this summer, not related to this, is here's 10 questions, you choose which one you want to write about. And I think that's something I really want to incorporate in the future here, because interesting, out of the 10 questions, I had 7 students this summer, all of them chose one of the 10. So that piqued my interest. Why that one? And it was about pregnancy and fairness and equity of hiring practices if someone's pregnant. But I thought that really gave me insight into something that was important to them to know and understand. And ironically, there was more males than females in the class. So how do I get them thinking about these things ahead? And then I had them pose some scenarios to each other about, here's something that could happen, what would you do? It was important to me to have their peer-to-peer feedback and to keep that part of it really going on, because it's easy to stand there and say, here's the right answer, but they are much more receptive to one another in a lot of those cases. So some of the challenges, one thing I've had a lot of folks ask me is, in this kind of model where the students are really guiding and they're leading and they're developing the course in that organic nature of what's going on, I've had the question, how do you keep the rigor? How do you maintain that rigor in this course? They're held to a standard. You know, during the situations, if they're not serious, they're going to be called out, they're going to be asked to redo something. When they write, they can't just say, here's 2 sentences about this. They really have to show they've thought through the problem, they've connected things, and not just, oh yeah, we learned about EEOC, let's just throw that on the paper. You should always be fair in hiring. You know, they have to show those connections. I've had to learn how to talk to students about managing bias. No matter who we are, we all have some bias, and most of the time we don't even recognize our bias. And that's something I've really talked to the students about and have asked them, because I think as they grow in their work environment, what are those biases you're bringing with you don't even know? I can give one example for me that I give the class. My mom was a very critical person. Like, nothing was ever good enough. The bar was always out of reach. So when I supervised staff for the first time, I had to realize the bar has to be within reach, you know? But I talked to them about identifying that and thinking about how you can see that and manage or foresee where that can come into play. And then one challenge I had was, there's extroverts and introverts. I am a complete introvert in all my life. In my class, how do I manage that? Because in a scenario, in an environment where there's a lot of open discussion, the extroverts can frequently take over. So that's a challenge I've still been trying to overcome, of how do I make sure the introverts get heard also and have a voice and are not afraid to speak up and have that time to process and then speak. And so part of that was questions there. One thing I've thought about doing, but I don't know if this would be good, because I like the interaction of the students between each others, but sometimes I think, you know, I have enough of a network of colleagues that I could bring some people in to play some of these roles or parts at times, but I question how that would change the dynamic in the room, because now I'm introducing this third person that the students don't know, and I might be introducing a topic related to gender or race where they may be more uncomfortable. So is that a good or bad idea? Is it something worth trying or not? And then, whoops, sorry, I'm moving on. And then I also have as a question, I thought about potentially videotaping so that they can see themselves, because they've just went through this action. They're stressed probably at the moment, and then they get this feedback. Would it help for them to be able to then, on their own, go back, replay it to see, okay, why did I get that feedback? So that's my ELO. So I have to give special thanks to my folks.
Thank you. Thank you.